Scientology doesn't have weekly rituals as such. What they have is they have classes that they offer, and they have counseling. And those are the services that Scientology provides. In many, many ways, Scientology is a lot more like a business than it is a religion. It sells classes, it sells counseling by the hour, and you pay set donation rates for those services or for those classes. And of course, they're selling books and lectures of L. Ron Hubbard's. So those are supposed to be its main income streams. And Sunday services, prayers, things like that, none of that's really a thing in Scientology. There's no God figure in Scientology. I wasn't raised to believe in God. God was a non-entity for me growing up. It was somebody that I was familiar with the concept of God because other children were being raised with God belief. And I sort of, I didn't really know what to think about it. I was sort of like, well, what do my parents think about it? And they seemed kind of ambivalent about it. Didn't seem really clear cut one way or the other. And Scientology doesn't really get into God very much. So none of that was part of the upbringing, right? Scientology prides itself on being a practical, applied religious philosophy. So it's all about assists and the tone scale and auditing and these things that you do in your life is what Scientology is more kind of how it operates. And so but there is definitely a social life in Scientology. And I was going to mention that my parents very much started hanging around with other Scientologists, having them over. All of our friends growing up were Scientologists. Not my friends. I met friends at school and stuff who obviously were not Scientologists, but because I didn't go to private school, I went to public school. My parents couldn't afford private school because they were paying for Scientology with all their money. So all of our money was pretty much going to Scientology. And we did buy a house. We bought a very, very cheap fixer-upper in Pasadena as our first house, and we moved into that when I hit fourth grade. And so I started going to Linda Vista in Pasadena. We kind of lived just by the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Mm-hmm. And that was where our first house was. And my dad started fixing that up. And they were actually starting to work for Scientology now at the Pasadena Mission. It was not an official, full-blown Scientology organization, what we call an org. They don't call them churches. They call them orgs. I mean, that kind of gives you an idea of the flavor of how people think about Scientology in the world of Scientology. Nobody thinks of Scientology as a church. They call it a church, but they don't think about it that way. They think about it as a place that you go to do classes and get counseling.